Hey, it's Nolan here. In today's video, I'm going to be restoring this old butcher's knife. This knife is honestly in great shape, so it might be more like a cleanup. I'm planning on leaving the original handle intact. I'm just going to re-sand it, get rid of all the big notches that are taken out of it, and I'm also going to clean up the blade, and of course, I'm going to get it razor sharp so that we can use it again. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a razor blade, and I'm going to try to scrape off all of this gunk that's like kind of gummed up on there. I don't think just scrubbing it would get it off, so we're going to try scraping it off. I was recently given this knife by my grandparents as a gift, and if you guys are watching, I love you, Grammy and Bob. This knife has a rich history with my family that I'll share more about later. And after talking to my grandparents a bit, I learned that this knife was my great-grandfather's knife from when he worked at a local butcher's shop in my old hometown. This green stuff, that looks like it's stuck on here, I think is wax. So I'm going to try and see if I can heat it up to get that off of there. I'm just going to touch it with a little bit of heat. Not enough to ruin the temper, just enough to hopefully warm up that wax. Helped it all. Oh yeah, look at that. Peels right off. There we go. Look at that. It's nice metal coming through there now. When talking to them about the knife, my grandma mentioned the wax and said it was from her when she was my age, and she would use this knife to cut up wax for candle making in their basement, which I thought was cool knowing that she used this knife to do a craft just like I do at the same age. Now that I've got the blade a majority of the way clean with the razor blade, I'm going to go ahead and take some steel wool and I'm going to scrub it in this water, see if I can get the rest of that excess rust off. Normally on a restoration project like this, I would just soak the knife in vinegar to get all the rust off, but that takes the knife back down to the bare steel, and I don't want that on this because this knife has a pretty cool patina, and I want to keep that intact as best as I can, so the steel wool should be a little bit more gentle on that. Alright, after scrubbing it down with the steel wool, here's how it's looking. It looks really good, and I also put a little bit of WD-40 on it just to shine it up and protect it from rust. And there's some interesting character that came out. There's a pretty big sized chip out of the back of it here, and some deep scratch in there. But it cleaned up pretty nice. But now we can move on to the handle. The coloring of it almost looks like it could be some sort of walnut, but the grain looks a little off. So I'm not 100% sure what the wood is. If you have any ideas, let me know down in the comments. I'm going to move on over my belt sander to flatten up these sides and clean up the spine a bit, and I'll tell you more how to do that there. I'm starting out with a 60 grit belt because it's pretty aggressive and it moves material really quickly, which is good for this wood because it turned out to be really oily, and if I used any higher grit belt, it probably would have clogged it super fast. Now for a little bit more backstory on this knife. Like I mentioned earlier, this knife belonged to my great-grandfather, and I asked my grandparents for any information they might remember about it, and they said he would have gotten this knife while he was working at an old butcher shop called Swift's Meat Plant in my old hometown of Elmira, New York, but we've since moved on from there. They also said that they can recall him using this knife out by their pool while he'd be grilling, and he'd use it to cut up their meat for that. My dad even mentioned he remembers my great-grandfather sharpening this knife a lot when my dad was just a boy. So it's really cool to me to be able to have this knife now because it must have meant a lot to my great-grandpa to keep it around in his collection, and he used it a lot, so hopefully I can do it justice and bring it back to life. When sanding this, I'm going to use a number of different parts of my grinder, like the small wheel and then the flat platen, to help me get into the slight curve on the spine and also keep a nice, even radius on the corners of the handle. I want to leave this knife as original as possible, however, I also wanted to add a little bit of a small flair of my own style to it. So for that, I'm just going to shape the back of the handle a little differently to match the same curve I put on some of my custom knives. It's such a small detail that you could never really tell it's there unless you know what you're looking for, and it's such a subtle touch of elegance. Alright, we got the handle all cleaned up on the grinder, and normally if I were making a knife, this is the point where I would take my files and I'd go through and refine the handle, but this handle shape is so simple I was able to do it all on the grinder. The next thing I have to do is clean up these little beveled areas, and I didn't dare do that on the grinder. I knew I'd mess up and scratch the blade, so I'm going to put down a little bit of tape, and then we're going to sand it by hand. The only tape I could find is this bacon duct tape, so don't judge my tape styles. That's all I had, but it'll work. Alright, this should be good. Now I can go ahead and take some 400 grit sandpaper and just run through there and clean that up real quick. I thought this was pretty cool. This Sharpie matches the radius on that notch perfectly. So I'm going to wrap this up in the sandpaper, and this is what I'm going to use to back it while I sand. All right, now to hand sand the rest of the handle, I got this cool little setup. I put my machinist vise in my regular bench vise and a little piece of wood in there so that my knife can sit in there vertically. And now I can hand sand away. All right, I'm gonna start again at 400 grit, but I gotta find my hand sanding stick. This is why I can't have nice things. I found it. It was on the floor. Why would it not be on the floor? But anyway, start at 400 grit, and I'm gonna take it up to 800 grit, I think. I'm sanding right now at a sort of diagonal. This way I can ensure that I get rid of all the grind lines, and my hand will be nice and smooth. Boing. Never forget to hand sand your spines. I see a lot of people forget to do it and there'll be just grind lines going across their spine every which way. But hand sanding them can really make your handles pop and just make everything a lot nicer. So make sure to always do that. All right, I've got everything sanded up to 600 grit, but the sandpaper is clogging really fast now. So I'm going to apply a little bit of oil to lubricate it. And now I'm going to start sanding with my 800 grit. This wood is really pretty. It almost looks like rosewood. Like there's really deep purples and reds. And this wood is super dense. Like my fingernail won't scratch it. And it's pretty heavy, honestly. This handle is gorgeous. It really surprised me. The wood is way darker than I thought it was. It almost looks like rosewood. That'd be such a cool surprise. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna apply a little bit of oil now to really bring out that grain. That is just really nice to look at. Super happy with this. I'm gonna give it a quick buff, and I'm also gonna buff the blade, and then we can move on to sharpening this thing. When I'm buffing this knife, I just use a soft wheel. I'm not sure what kind it is, but then I use a little bit of beeswax to shine it. And normally I use a white buffing compound to polish my wood handles, but this wood was so dense it didn't need it. And also, since I was buffing the blade, I didn't want to mess up the nice patina it had, so I just used beeswax for that too. All right, here's how we're looking. The handle got a nice shine on it. The brass pins came out really nice. And the blade's got a pretty good sheen on it now too. And overall, it looks basically the same as I started. So, like I said, not a full restoration, more of like a cleanup. But the knife is very clean. The spine came out nice. And the handle actually was in great condition still. I hardly had to take off any wood. But now we can go ahead and sharpen this and get this thing functional. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start sharpening it on this 1000 grit whetstone. I'm gonna do a pretty thin angle on this because I'm not planning on cutting through any bones or anything like that. Just slicing meat. So I should be able to do a pretty thin angle on this thing. Get it like really sharp. When sharpening any knife, the most important thing is to make sure you get a burr along the entire edge, not leaving out any areas like the heel of the knife or the tip. So it's important to contact all the areas with the stone. All right, I finished up on 1000 grit. I went till I got a burr on both sides and removed it on 1000 grit. So I'm gonna flip it around and I'm gonna move on to 3000 grit. But first, I gotta flatten the stone. Got my stone flattener. I put down some extra water on the stone. Just go back and forth till you remove all the scratches from underneath. There we go. Got a nice clean surface now. Can finish sharpening. All right, finished up with a 3000 grit, and the knife is already sharp, but I'm not gonna show you all yet because we have one more stone and it's at 12,000 grit, which is extremely high, but it should give us a nice fine edge to do that nice fine meat slicing. You can really tell how fine the stone is by how little sound it makes. It's so satisfying to use, and it works so well. To finish it off, I'm going to do backward strokes to hopefully help deburr this knife. After finishing the 12,000 grit stone, I got a really nice mirror polish on the edge, but I'm still going to go ahead and strop it just to make sure the burr is completely removed. All right, the first test of sharpness I'm going to do is see if I can cut the little baby hairs on my arms. Oh yeah, right off. These hairs are so little, it's really hard to shave them normally. So this knife is really sharp. Let's test it on some paper now though. This knife is like a laser. See if I can curve it. Yep. This thing is nice. This thing came out really nice, I think. But let me know what you think down in the comments. Did I do it justice, or was it better off before? Like I said, it wasn't much of a restoration. It was mainly just cleaning it up to make it more functional. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut some meat with it, make a quick beef jerky recipe, and show you how it works. And let me know what you think down in the comments. I really appreciate you watching, and God bless. This is a super simple beef jerky recipe that only uses 2 ingredients and the oven. And I'll start out by slicing an entire top round of beef super thin. You can kind of tell by these clips just how well this knife works now. All I have to do is pull the knife and it goes all the way through the meat with essentially its own weight, which is really impressive considering this knife is incredibly light. And once I've got all my thin slices of meat, I'll use about a half a bottle of Dell steak sauce, and I'll throw all the slices of meat into the bowl and I'll mix it around. Now this sauce is very strong, so just dip the meat in and try not to let it soak very long. And then I'll spread all the pieces out onto a wire rack and try not to let them touch each other, that way they dry out evenly. After spreading them all out, you're going to put it all in the oven at a low temp of around 170 degrees Fahrenheit. And the most important part of this is to keep the door slightly propped open so that it can mimic a dehydrator. And then I'll put an oven mitt in the seam to do this. Then I'll set it for an hour and check it each time and leave it for a total of 4 hours until it's done. Now somehow I forgot to record the finished beef jerky, so I'm super sorry about that, but it came out just like any others and it tasted great. Here's a final look at the knife. I really appreciate you being here, thanks for watching, and God bless.